ma paluksin siia Lauri Sivoneni ja põhjus on väga lihtne. Räägime transseksuaalide diskrimineerimisest. Lauri Sivonen on Euroopa Nõukogu inimõiguste voliniku büroo nõunik.
Does the microphone work? It appears to work. So tere to everyone. There's a PowerPoint presentation as well, which I think is on the way to this screen, I hope. Because issues regarding transgender persons are not so easy probably to discuss. You need some visual aids here as well. Terminology may also be problematic. And I very much wish luck to the interpreters that they can follow the verbs and then all the terminology here, which might not be so easy in Estonian. I come indeed from the office of the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, and would also like to bring in the greetings of Commissioner Thomas Hammerberg to this meeting, which is a very timely conference indeed. I was also producing, how is it with the presentation, the PowerPoint? It will be, okay, so let's see whether we can get even the text there. So, yes. Let's see, it seems to be in the middle, this one, so you all get a review of almost everything here in a very quick way. There we are. So this is the start. Really, when we talk about lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender persons, the LGBT, as already has been said, we don't always understand the diversity actually behind all these different groups of people. And this is particularly so as it goes to transgender persons or transgender people. The first specific feature regarding transgender people is actually the ground of discrimination if we compare them with the LGBT. Of course, as you know, with lesbian, gay and bisexual persons, we are more talking about sexual orientation there as the possible discrimination ground. In fact, with transgender people, we are talking about gender identity. And gender identity is also actually quite closely linked to sex and gender, of course, as well. This concept is a bit newer. The current definition really most often quoted comes from the Yogyakarta Principles from 2007. Probably sounds a bit complex. I read it out nevertheless, very slowly. Gender identity is understood to refer to each person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned at birth, including the personal sense of the body, which may involve, if freely chosen, modification of bodily appearance or function by medical, surgical or other means, end of bracket, and other expressions of gender, including dress, speech and mannerisms. So this really means how we express our gender, how we act our gender, how the gendered role, how it actually comes about from us. And this, of course, actually includes both concepts of identity and expression and can apply, of course, to practically everyone. Perhaps not some people who identify themselves as non-gendered, but more or less almost to everybody. But really, as a discrimination ground, this is mainly associated with transgender persons. Who are then transgender or trans persons, as we always also use the term? A very heterogeneous group in itself. As you see, really, probably the more defining feature there is that transgender persons, they are not quite at ease with the sex assigned at birth. It does not correspond with their gender identity and their gender expression or gender role. And this, of course, includes people, the list is there, transsexuals, transvestites, cross-dressers, multigender, no gender, intersex, other gender variant people as well. It's a very complicated list, problematic categories being applied. There are also medical classifications behind. They overlap as well. So we should not dwell too much on these classifications. Perhaps simply to highlight one issue there, that transsexual persons are those persons who are probably most likely to change their bodily appearance and go through gender reassignment treatment, including surgery, in order to permanently correct their gender. But this again may not, or confirm their gender, but this is not always the case, and for the other categories this probably is rarer. But again, there is overlap. And sadly, the feature which is combined is really that all transgender persons are quite often victims of discrimination on grounds of their gender identity. Now, there is loads of research now, or well, I would say loads, but there is an increasing body of research about the discrimination. I haven't chosen this on the knowledge that we have Her Majesty's ambassador here as well from the UK, but one piece of path-breaking research really into the experience of discrimination by transgender persons comes from the UK, from 2007, published the Engendered Penalties Survey. There is quite a good participation, and they really identified employment, healthcare, leisure and education as the major areas of discrimination. Some of the results there doesn't look too nice. In employment, 42% of the respondents said that they did not live in their preferred gender role because they feared the impact on their employment status. 25%, so 1 in 4, had changed jobs due to harassment and bullying. In the field of health, 29% felt that being trans adversely affected the way treated by healthcare professionals. Safety more generally, 73% had experienced harassment in public spaces, so almost 3 in 4. And 18.5% had not been treated appropriately by the police, according to their own opinion. And on leisure and services, 73% experienced harassment in public spaces. 47% did not use public services or leisure facilities at all for fear of discrimination, experiencing discrimination in these public services. And in education, a very important area, bullying will be discussed later on today, 64% young trans men and 44% young trans women experienced harassment and bullying at school. And at the home, the last detail regarding this survey, 45% reported a family breakdown due to cross-gender identity. But it's not simply the UK, and again I haven't chosen this following study because I think the Belgian ambassador is here as well. In Belgium, 2010, the Belgian Institute for Equality of Men and Women, they published a survey there as well. And this survey identified, first of all, obstacles, according to transgender persons themselves, why they did not finally do the transition, gender transition. These are overlapping categories, as you see from the percentages, but really the majority, 56.1%, feared of losing their jobs simply. 49.6%, the family opinion was affecting really the decision, and in 43.1%, other people's opinions. So really the perceived attitudes, they do matter in this field very, very much. In employment field in Belgium, 15.6% were unemployed, which was higher than the normal percentage there. 26.6% had changed jobs due to being trans, and more than half kept gender identity hidden at work. So very similar from the UK survey, in fact. As for health, 31.2% were afraid of prejudice by care providers. 77.4% found waiting times for gender assignment treatment a problem. And as the worst information here really, 62.3% had contemplated suicide and 22% had actually attempted suicide. So very serious data. And problem areas by the participants in the survey, they identified that the criteria for gender reassignment and name change, which included hormone treatment and infertility treatment as well, that this was a problem, sterilization in other terms. Lack of privacy when changing birth certificate. need for a transition identification document during the transition process, which was quite long, quite often. The limited scope of equal treatment legislation, which more often only applied to transsexual persons rather than transgender more generally, and need for changes on diplomas and certificates after gender reassignment. That wasn't easy. So quite a few problems. But then to the really extremes. It's not only discrimination, it's really crime, extreme form of violence as well, really, transphobic murders. In Europe, the Transgender Europe has a monitoring project regarding these, and they have identified since 2008 41 transphobic murders in Europe. The list of countries is there, and it's quite wide in Europe, really. We are not talking about one part of Europe. It's Albania, Germany, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Serbia, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. So really, this is happening all around Europe and is certainly a reason for concern. It is particularly sad, therefore, that when we see some of the very few attitude survey regarding the general attitudes towards transgender persons, that there is very little understanding for them, even though it's quite clear that discrimination is happening. In a survey from Germany from 2008, maybe pretty old already, we are now in 2011, but still in this survey, 45% had no understanding for those who intended to or had undergone gender reassignment. So they didn't understand this really at all and did not lend any understanding either. 49% believed trans persons were not discriminated against in society at all. And 44% felt that nothing at all should be done for trans persons. So conclusions from research, we could say that, first of all, trans persons clearly are victims of serious discrimination and hate crime. This means that further non-discrimination measures are needed, not less but further. Also, and there are more studies as well, the knowledge base on the problems faced by trans persons is improving. But we certainly also need to raise awareness. I think this is happening more among decision makers already. We have evidence on that, but among the general population, I think we certainly need more. The Commissioner for Human Rights is certainly doing this. We published 2 years ago a paper on human rights and gender identity, which has turned into a bestseller in the office. And we will publish in 2 weeks' time a big report on discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity in Europe, all council of member states, 47 included, which includes loads of information and also recommendations also regarding transgender people. We have acted quite a lot in cooperation with the Fundamental Rights Agency of the EU in Vienna in doing this study as well. Now, if we need more protection, then what is the current protection situation? At the international level, of course, the basic principle is that all people should fully enjoy human rights without discrimination. And of course, this should happen in every country. In the international and European human rights standards, they should apply equally to trans persons as to everyone else. These human rights conventions, treaties, they usually include a non-discrimination provision, an article there. The article usually does not directly mention gender identity, but the treaty bodies and the persons interpreting, the courts also interpreting these treaties, really they are interpreted in a way that gender identity actually is part of the non-discrimination provision. However, there's also a very new convention from the Council of Europe, the Convention Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence from this year, open for signature last month. It includes gender identity directly in the provision. There have been several cases in European courts regarding transgender people, and I will run through them pretty quickly. From the European Court of Human Rights, interpreting the European Convention on Human Rights, one of the major issues was the legal recognition of gender identity. And there really now all member states, they have a positive obligation to recognize gender reassignment of transsexuals. It's really in birth certificates or the civil register. There were cases against France from 92 and against the UK from 2002, which made this jurisprudence, and they applied Article 8 on the right to respect for private life. And it is about personal autonomy, human dignity, and freedom to determine personal identity. Also, these rulings they require that states do make adjustments to legislation and services. And this, of course, means reasonable accommodation, and I will come back to that later. The Christian Goodwin judgment against the UK from 2002 was really a seminal judgment, really a milestone. I won't read that quotation but really it highlights that at that point, 2002, the legislation, or let's say the jurisprudence coming from the court, really changed a lot, and it also opened the way to much further litigation and decisions from the Court of Human Rights. Another issue in the James judgments was, of course, the right to marry as well, and right to marry in accordance with the reassigned gender. This is Article 12 of the Convention on the right to marry according to the national law. It refers to national law, so that is the primary consideration first. Really, this means that currently, according to European human rights law, transgender persons should be able to marry a person of the opposite gender after gender reassignment, or they should be able to enter neutral marriage, gender-neutral marriage, according to the national legislation, if that is available there. But this is, of course, not available in all countries. Then there's another issue, of course, for couples where the other member of the couple goes gender reassignment. And then the right to continue in an existing marriage, that is still falls under state margin of appreciation. There may still be, according to European Court of Human Rights, a requirement of divorce there. But this depends on proportionality. In the case of UK, there was a case on that. It was still in the margin of appreciation of the member state. But if really the conditions for divorce or for partnership legislation, they are particularly difficult, it may be different, the judgment, but we will see when other cases will come to the court. Another big issue was access to gender reassignment treatment and also the insurance coverage for that. The current situation is from the European Court of Human Rights that gender reassignment treatment should be available based on the trans person's individual decision and a medical diagnosis, and also that treatment should be covered by insurance for necessary medical care when such insurance is available. And there have been cases against Germany, Lithuania, and Switzerland during the past few years making this jurisprudence. And this jurisprudence really strengthened the principles of personal autonomy and self-determination of transgender persons. Also, pension entitlement in accordance with reassigned gender was one case there, 2006. And as you know, in some countries in Europe, there are differential age requirements depending on the pension entitlements. Women may quite often get a pension a bit earlier than men, in fact. And really, the court ruled that, again, the reassigned gender prevails in these cases. And finally, very recently, last year, there was a decision of judgment from the court in a case concerning Spain, although there was no violation found. But in this decision, the court really said that although not gender identity as such, but at least transsexuality is, with reference to the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, really is a prohibited ground of discrimination under Article of the Convention, which is the non-discrimination article of the Convention. And therefore, really, it's now very black and white and clear that these issues are covered by the Convention. But of course, there is jurisprudence also from the EU, from the Luxembourg Court, the Court of Justice of the European Union. There, in fact, the ground used currently, it is the ground of sex or gender with reference to EU directives on equal treatment for men and women. This is because EU operates on a closed list of discrimination grounds. Gender identity is not there, and it cannot be such other ground as in most other conventions. Therefore, the only available, the closest to it, is actually sex and gender. And the European Court of Justice has really said that these persons intending to undergo or having undergone gender reassignment, they should not be discriminated because of this fact. And there have been several cases, well, only 3 cases, I think, so far in the Luxembourg court here. The first one regarded the job dismissal of a transsexual person due to gender reassignment treatment from 1996. And again, other issues a bit overlapping with the Strasbourg jurisprudence was the pensionable age, and also survivor's pension, where this was related to a marital relationship which was not available to transgender persons at the time. Further interpretation tools really for understanding how the international framework applies here. A recommendation from the Committee of Ministers from last year is very useful on measures to combat discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. And the Yogyakarta culture principles I already mentioned, produced by international human rights experts on the application of international human rights law in relations to sexual orientation and gender identity from 2007, from even a more broader perspective. And now, if we want to improve the protection, again, I think we have to very quickly see in what areas we can do it, what is happening at the national level. Equal treatment legislation, of course, is a crucial tool for improving protection. There, currently, the gender identity ground is explicitly mentioned in national legislation only in 9 countries in Europe so far. These are Albania, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Germany, Hungary, Montenegro, Serbia, Sweden, and the UK. The terminology varies. It's not always gender identity. Some other specific term regarding trans persons may be used, but still it is really clearly in the legislation, not on a sex ground, but really on the ground of gender identity more broadly. In other countries is sex and gender ground, which can be applied according to EU jurisprudence, as is the case in Estonia, in fact, currently. But this is not always then clear if it's not specifically mentioned that it applies to transgender persons. Hate crime legislation, of course, is the other national tool. Incitement to hatred, violence, or discrimination against transgender people, transphobia, we usually mention this. Bias motivation can be an aggravating circumstance in common crime as well. However, in Europe, only Sweden and Scotland in the UK so far have specific provisions on transphobia in hate crime legislation. Other countries may have more general hate crime provisions and also concerning, let's say, homophobia. But again, it's not always so clear how well it applies to transphobic crime or incitement to hatred. Equality bodies, again, another important tool. These are independent statutory bodies promoting equal treatment legislation and handling complaints about discrimination. And there's, of course, one in Estonia as well. They can have a central role in combating discrimination against transgender people. Again, there, Equinet, the European network of these equality bodies, made a survey in 2010, and only 25% of equality bodies actually is doing so. I know in Estonia something has actually already been done, but still more needs to be done, I think, in all European countries, that transgender issues also come to the agenda of equality bodies. And finally, legislation on gender reassignment, maybe all different pieces of legislation, as is the case in Estonia. It's not one piece, but several pieces. Conditions for getting gender reassignment treatment vary greatly among countries. And also in several countries, there's no legislation in Europe yet. We will have more information in the Commissioner's report in 2 weeks' time on this, and I will not say more about it, but it is an issue, certainly. Now, to end my presentation with some of the open questions or needs for further development, what really then should be done? The first question, of course, is the limited scope of protection. Both at international and national will we see that perhaps transsexual persons are often covered by this protective framework, but it's very clear whether other trans persons are covered. Therefore, it would be best if gender identity would be explicitly included in equal treatment legislation. Also, it is useful to use both gender identity and the sex and gender grounds. They can be used together strategically, and they would improve, give a maximum protection. Also, it would be useful to have comprehensive equal treatment legislation covering all grounds and also all areas of activity. So it would not, for example, only be employment where it would be applied, but really all areas. And of course, transphobia should be clearly part of hate crime legislation. And now back to reasonable accommodation, as I referred to the judgments from the European Court of Human Rights. It's quite clear that differential treatment, in fact, is necessary for transgender people so that they can enjoy human rights on an equal basis with others. So it's not sort of special treatment as such, additional rights, but really means of ensuring that transgender people can actually enjoy their rights. And here, the concept of reasonable accommodation, quite often applied to people with disabilities currently, should be extended to cover also other groups of people. What it means, reasonable accommodation, it really means the necessary and appropriate modifications and adjustments, not imposing a disproportionate or undue burden, for example, in the place of employment. For transgender people, this could mean, for example, differential procedures for civil registration, special facilities for changing name and sex in identity documents and educational diplomas, adaptations to the working environment in terms of unisex toilets, and the availability of time for treatment related to gender reassignment. Perhaps also the possibility to continue in an existing marriage after gender reassignment when it is not normally authorized for same-sex couples could be some such special measure, as we actually have examples from countries already about that. And really, the conditions for the legal recognition of gender reassignment is a huge issue. There we are talking about hormone treatment and infertility, really sterilization requirements, and these are very strange indeed from a human rights perspective. There is no clear jurisprudence from the Court of Human Rights yet there, but I think this is a big issue. The divorce requirement is also problematic, although still tolerated by the European Court, at least partially. But we have jurisprudence from the constitutional courts from Austria and Germany who have found actually these requirements violations of fundamental rights. Also for these conditions, the influence of psychiatric medical classifications regarding gender dysphoria and gender identity disorder, either from the WHO or some national classifications. The US DSM classification is very influential in Europe as well. They influence quite a bit this issue. It's a very complicated issue, and their debates are going on. Classifications are being revised. From the human rights perspective, what is crucial is that there is access to transgender-specific healthcare, and also that transgender persons really, they have the right to self-determination on the treatment. So these should be observed in any case. But then we are not simply talking about minority concerns here, in fact. As I already said in the beginning, the Yogyakarta definition of gender identity applies to practically everybody. We should really recognize the general diversity in gendered identities, expressions, and roles in society more broadly. And this also would call for a need for proportionality in distinctions, particularly official ones, which we make between men and women. I don't think it is always necessary to make this man-woman difference to be in such clear-cut terms. Also, the Luxembourg Court of the EU made a decision not long ago regarding insurance premiums, how they are differentiated between men and women, and say that this was not right. You know, you cannot discriminate on that between men and women. So that's also relevant here. So I would say that the combined use of the gender identity and the sex grounds, the discrimination grounds, and their cross-fertilization would enrich the understanding of both grounds. That really the sex ground is not only men and women, there is far more in between and around. Simple gender binaries do not really correspond with reality. And the broad understanding of gender diversity would therefore contribute to the equality of everybody. We do not need to invent gender diversity at all. We simply have to become aware of it and recognize it. This will open up a broader scope of gendered identities and roles for everybody. Thank you.
Aitäh! Kuna meie aeg on läbi, siis jäävad küsimused selleks hetkeks, kui Lauri Sivoneni on võimalik kuulata ka paneeldiskussioonis. Ma loodan, et Lauri annab mulle selle ilusasti andeks, aga paneeldiskussioonis ta kohe hetke pärast peale kohvipausi ka kaasa lööb ja kõik küsimused ehk selle paneeli alguses siis on võimalik ära esitada seda enam, et teemad väisavad seda sama valdkonda, millest praegu oli juttu. Aga Laurile suur aitäh veel kord!